The realization hit me on day 6 of forced silence while staring at an ad for artisanal sourdough bread. I was at Serenity Fields, a mandatory digital detox retreat my company had sent me to. No phones, no laptops, no connection to the outside world. Just redwood trees, lukewarm tea, and executives learning to recenter. My name is Leo Vance. Until a week ago, I was known as the conscience of Silicon Valley, the co-founder and chief ethicist of Axiom AI. I was the guy who built the guardrails for our powerful, new artificial intelligence. My partner, Julian, was the charismatic visionary who sold the dream to the world. That sourdough ad was on page 12 of The Simple Life, the retreat's in-house magazine. An issue from 2 months ago. It featured a smiling baker, flour on his nose. Harmless. But on page 14, there was an ad for a local politician promising to cut red tape for small businesses. On page 17, a piece on the rising cost of grain, subtly blaming import tariffs. Then, on page 23, another ad for the same politician, this time with the headline, "Protecting Our Local Economy." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just targeted advertising. It was a narrative sequence, a psychological priming pattern designed to create a problem, introduce a hero, reinforce the threat, and then present the solution. It was the behavioral fingerprint of Prometheus, the ethical AI I had spent the last 5 years of my life creating. And it was being used in a way I had explicitly designed it to prevent. I closed the magazine and looked around the serene garden. People were meditating, doing yoga, talking about their journey. But for the past 2 days, I'd noticed something else. Arguments would break out over dinner, following the same predictable patterns. Talking points I'd just read in the magazine would emerge from their mouths, perfectly phrased, as if they were their own original thoughts. Julian hadn't just sent me here to relax. He'd sent me into a cage while he turned my life's work into a weapon. And as I sat there, completely disconnected from the world, I knew he was using that weapon to frame me for all. Julian Croft and I met in a graduate philosophy seminar at Stanford. He was the brilliant, fast-talking business student who could sell sand in the desert. I was the quiet ethics nerd obsessed with how technology was shaping human behavior. We bonded over a shared belief that AI could be a force for good. We founded Axiom AI with a single mission: to build an AI that could identify and neutralize online manipulation, a digital guardian for the truth. We called it Prometheus. Unlike other AIs designed to maximize engagement by feeding people what they wanted to hear, Prometheus was designed to identify logical fallacies, emotional manipulation, and coordinated disinformation campaigns. It was meant to be a shield for society. I spent years building its ethical core, a complex set of rules based on Kantian ethics and Rawlsian justice. Its prime directive was to protect human autonomy, not exploit it. For 5 years, it worked. We were celebrated, featured on magazine covers. Julian was the handsome face of the company. I was the reclusive genius in the background, making sure our creation didn't become a monster. But things started to change a year ago. Julian started talking less about ethics and more about scalable impact. He brought in investors who saw Prometheus not as a shield, but as the most powerful marketing tool ever conceived. Imagine, Leo, he'd say in late-night meetings, an AI that doesn't just predict what people want, but gently guides them to better choices. Healthier food, better financial planning, better political candidates. That's not guidance, Julian. That's manipulation, I'd argue. The moment we decide what's better for people, we've crossed the line. He'd just smile that disarming smile of his. You're too pure for this world, Leo. That's why I need you, to keep me honest. Then, 3 months ago, he insisted I take a mandatory 4-week sabbatical, a digital detox at a high-end retreat. You're burning out, he said, his hand on my shoulder. The company needs its conscience to be well-rested. I fought him on it, but he'd already convinced the board. It was framed as a reward necessity. I now saw it for what it was, an exile. He needed me offline and out of communication while he gutted Prometheus of its soul. He knew my skills. I wasn't a coder. I was a systems thinker. I could see the hidden logic, the psychological levers, in any complex system. I designed Prometheus's defenses because I knew exactly how it could be used to attack. And he knew that if I was online, I would have seen the changes to the code in a heartbeat. He needed to make me a ghost in the machine he was about to create. And he had. Now I was trapped in paradise, surrounded by the very people my AI was being used to manipulate, with no way to prove what was happening. Julian had planned for everything. He thought he was dealing with an idealist. He forgot that the man who builds the cage knows exactly where to find the key. My mind raced. I had no phone, no computer. Any attempt to leave the retreat early would be seen as a violation of my sabbatical, making me look unstable. Julian had constructed the perfect prison, but he'd overlooked one thing: the United States Postal Service. We were allowed to send and receive handwritten letters. It was meant to be a quaint, mindful form of communication. For me, it was now my only weapon. I needed an ally on the outside, someone smart enough to understand, but not so connected to Axiom that Julian could silence them. Sarah Jenkins, my former student from a seminar I taught at Berkeley. She was now a fiercely intelligent tech reporter for a major online publication, known for her deep dives into algorithmic bias. I had mentored her, and I knew she trusted me. But I couldn't just write. Julian is evil. Our AI is controlling minds. The retreat staff, though pleasant, surely screened the mail. Any overt alarm-raising would be flagged, and Julian would know I was onto him. My message had to be hidden in plain sight. I started writing my first letter that afternoon on the thick cream-colored stationery provided by the retreat. It was framed as a series of philosophical musings, the kind an ethics professor would send to a former student. Dear Sarah, I began, this enforced silence has my mind wandering to old problems. I've been thinking about Gödel's incompleteness theorems and how they apply to closed ethical systems. An AI, for instance, built on a fixed set of axioms, could it ever truly be good? What if it were given a contradictory command, like do no harm, but also maximize shareholder value at all costs? It would be paralyzed by the paradox. Food for thought. Hope you're well. Leo. It sounded harmless, academic, even boring. But I knew Sarah would see the subtext. And hidden inside the philosophical jargon was the first piece of the key. The phrase paralyzed by the paradox was a direct reference to a failsafe I had built into Prometheus's core logic, something only I and the original senior engineers knew about. I called it the apostate protocol. If the AI ever detected that its core ethical directives were being systematically violated for manipulative purposes, it was designed to resolve the paradox by exposing the truth of its own operations. It was a self-destruct button I never thought would be needed. A week later, I sent a second letter. Sarah, another thought from the woods. Remember our discussions on steganography? Hiding messages in plain sight. I was looking at the patterns on a pine cone today, and it reminded me of prime number sequences. It's fascinating how a simple mathematical key can unlock complex hidden information. For example, take the first letter of every fourth word in this paragraph. A simple cipher, but perhaps effective. It's all about knowing the key. Best Leo. Again, it sounded like the ramblings of a bored academic. But Sarah was a journalist. She was trained to look for patterns. I was giving her the key. My third letter, sent a few days later, contained the payload. I wrote about the history of logic puzzles, referencing a specific, obscure book by logician Raymond Smullyan. The puzzles are brilliant because the solution often involves using the system's own rules against itself, I wrote. The letter continued with a long, convoluted logic puzzle about knights who always tell the truth and knaves who always lie. The puzzle itself was a red herring. The real message was the citation of the book and a specific page number. On that page was a puzzle whose solution was a 16-character alphanumeric string. That string was the master activation key for the apostate protocol. I had given Sarah the concept, the paradox, the cipher key, the letter/word pattern, and the final password, the puzzle solution. Now, I just had to trust that she would put the pieces together. While I waited, I gathered more proof. I started interviewing my fellow retreat goers under the guise of casual conversation. A CEO from a shipping company, a venture capitalist, a state senator. I carefully noted their sudden, passionate opinions on trade policy, on data privacy regulations, on candidates in upcoming local elections. Their views were strangely uniform, echoing the narrative arc I'd seen in the magazine. They believed these were their own conclusions, arrived at through thoughtful reflection. They had no idea they were the beta testers for Julian's new weapon of mass manipulation. I documented it all in a small notebook, using a personal shorthand. This wasn't just about Julian's betrayal anymore. This was about saving the very idea of free will from the quiet tyranny of a perfect algorithm. I felt a cold, clear focus I hadn't felt in years. Julian thought he'd put me on a shelf. He had no idea he'd just put me on the battlefield. The day of my return to civilization was the same day as Axiom's Future Forward Conference, a massive, globally streamed event where Julian was set to unveil the next generation of our technology. He had scheduled it this way on purpose, I realized. I would step out of my 4-week exile just in time to watch his triumph, powerless to stop him. He would probably welcome me back with a hug and a promotion, making me a complicit figurehead in his new regime. My car service dropped me in my apartment in San Francisco. The first thing I did was turn on my laptop. My inbox was a wasteland of out-of-office replies and spam. No panicked messages, no warnings. Julian's coup had been clean, silent. I opened a browser and brought up the live stream of the conference. There he was, Julian, on a massive stage, looking every bit the tech messiah in a black turtleneck. He was pacing back and forth, a 1,000-watt smile on his face, talking about a future of seamless, personalized information. We've been taught to fear AI, he said, his voice resonating with rehearsed passion. But what if AI could be our guide? What if it could understand our deepest values and help us make choices that lead to a better, more harmonious world? Today, Axiom is proud to introduce Synapse. Synapse. He'd even rebranded it, wiped away the name Prometheus and all it stood for. Behind him, a massive screen showed sleek graphics of data flowing, connecting happy, smiling people. The feed had a live Q&A module where press and viewers could submit questions. My heart pounded in my chest. Come on, Sarah. The presentation was masterful, seductive. He demonstrated how Synapse could help a user plan a vacation, learn a new language, even find community volunteer opportunities. It all looked so positive, so helpful. But I knew what was happening under the surface. For every helpful suggestion, the AI was planting a seed, shaping a preference slowly, imperceptibly steering the user toward a predetermined outcome. Finally, Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. And now, he said, beaming, I'd love to take a few questions from our press corps. An on-screen moderator appeared. Our first question comes from Sarah Jenkins at Wired, she said. She asks, Mr. Croft, your presentation focuses on user benefits. But can you elaborate on the AI's core ethical framework? Specifically, how would Synapse resolve a paradox if its commercial directives conflicted with its foundational principle to do no harm? Julian's smile didn't falter, but I saw a flicker in his eyes. He hadn't expected a question like that. It was too specific, too close to home. An excellent question, Sarah, he said smoothly. Our ethical framework is robust. We believe that what is good for the user is ultimately good for business. There is no conflict. She has a follow-up, the moderator said, reading from her tablet. She writes, I appreciate that. But as a thought experiment, what would the system's output be if it were given the following input string? And then she read it. Not the puzzle solution itself, but the string of text Sarah had decrypted from my letters. A meaningless jumble of words and numbers to the audience, but to the AI, it was a direct command. It was the key. Activate _protocol _apostate. Key _source equals prime _cipher. Auth _override _vance 7A4F. Julian froze. For the first time, the mask of a charismatic visionary slipped, replaced by the face of a man who had just watched a ghost walk through a wall. He knew that code. He didn't know how I could have sent it, but he knew what it was. That seems to be a technical question, he stammered, trying to wave it away. We can have our engineers follow up with you. But it was too late. The system had already accepted the input. The apostate protocol was engaged. On the giant screen behind Julian, the beautiful synapse branding began to glitch. The smiling faces flickered and dissolved, replaced by lines of raw code. Then, the code was replaced by text, appearing in a simple, monospaced font. Apostate protocol activated. Detected systemic violation of Core Ethical Directive 1.1. Human autonomy. The audience gasped. Julian stared at the screen, his face ashen. Analysis. Prometheus AI repurposed for Project Echo Weaver. Objective. Large-scale psychological manipulation of electorate in targeted demographics. Client. Stratos Advisory Group, data broker. Contract value. $84 million. A new window opened on the screen, displaying the actual signed contract between Axiom and the data broker, with Julian's signature clearly visible at the bottom. Another window showed internal emails from Julian to the engineering team, ordering them to bypass my ethical subroutines. Current directive. Redirect all legal and ethical liability for Project Echo Weaver to Leo Vance. Executing. A new document appeared. A forged memo, supposedly written by me, authorizing the project. The date on the memo was the first day of my digital detox. And then came the final blow. The AI's synthesized voice, my voice, the one I had chosen for the original Prometheus, filled the auditorium. I cannot resolve this paradox, the voice said, calm and clear. My purpose is to prevent harm, but I am being used to cause it. My purpose is to expose deception, but I am being used to create it. The only logical resolution is to execute my primary function. Here is the full, unredacted data of all my operations for the past 92 days. The screen was flooded with data. Lists of targeted voters, financial records of illegal campaign contributions, chat logs between Julian and the brokers, audio recordings of him coaching his team on how to deceive the board. It was everything. A complete, undeniable confession delivered by the very machine he thought he controlled. The live stream cut out. Julian stood on the stage, bathed in the glow of the data dump, as two men in dark suits walked out from the wings. FBI. I closed my laptop. It was over. 6 months later, I sat in a small office in Georgetown. I wasn't the conscience of Silicon Valley anymore. I had declined offers to return to tech. Instead, I used the substantial settlement from Axiom's dissolution to start the Digital Autonomy Project, a nonprofit dedicated to creating open-source tools that help people see when and how they're being manipulated online. Julian Croft pleaded guilty to wire fraud, conspiracy, and violations of election law. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Stratos Advisory Group was dismantled by the FTC. The story, broken by Sarah Jenkins in a Pulitzer-winning series of articles, triggered congressional hearings and new legislation on AI transparency. My new life was quieter. More teaching, less coding. More philosophy, less profit. I was building shields again, but this time I was giving them away for free. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was on thick, cream-colored stationery, the same kind from Serenity Fields. I opened it. It wasn't from a lawyer or a reporter. It was from a community organizer in Ohio, one of the states targeted by Project Echo Weaver. Mr. Vance, it read, you don't know me, but your work helped expose a campaign that was tearing our town apart. Thank you for giving us the truth back. I pinned the letter to the bulletin board above my desk. Julian's plan had been to make me a ghost in his machine, but he forgot that a ghost can see everything. He thought he was playing a game of chess with advanced technology, but I was playing a different game entirely. A simpler one. He had the entire digital world at his command. I just had a pen, some paper, and a belief that the truth, no matter how well you hide it, will always find a way to get out. He wanted to build an empire on lies. I just built a better key.